Dimp Digital presents Idle Game Chat.
Cool.
Here we are then, Logan. New setup for you. Worse mic, worse camera. And just as I went to go live here, it switched our positions helpfully, so the video viewers will see that I'm on the right-hand side and you're now on the left-hand side. No idea why it decided to do that. But that's the welcome to the PC space, where it seemingly does what it wants, when it wants, and you just have to try and get along for the ride and work it out as best you can.
I don't know what's happened, unless for some reason it's because I muted myself because I had to sniff, and I don't like the idea. But I've muted myself several times on the old setup, and I don't think that's ever been an issue. So, yeah, new challenges for us. Worse headset, worse camera, despite spending a fortune on technology. So it goes to show you, using a 5-year-old iPad and a knackered old headset sometimes is an upgrade.
Absolutely. Sometimes what you get the old stuff in, all the new tech. It's all that shit you get off Amazon. Most of it's toot, isn't it? You have to really delve into the doldrums of anything on there to be careful that you don't get just crap.
Tell you what, though, these iPads...
it's only a fiver. It lasts a month. And you're like, well, that's why it was a fiver then.
Well, I've got like a Logitech proper webcam and everything. And you think, how is this worse than the front-facing camera on an iPad?
I'll tell you, even like, I know Adcock uses his iPhone and so does Biff. Probably better camera than what I've got, and this is like a Razer, proper jobby. So those handheld little tablet stroke phones are probably the leaders when it comes to image quality.
Strange, isn't it? Because you look at the size of the aperture, you think that should be better. And then, you see yourself, and it's like this blurry mess, and you think, well,
what's happened
here? What
are
we doing? What's happened? Yeah.
What's happened in the gaming world is what people are going to be asking. I thought I'd start off with some FGL quickie updates. So we've had Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty come out, which is the expansion, and I guess I would say like it's a 2.0 update they're calling it. It's basically, the game's pretty good now. After a few years, this is the final redemption arc for Cyberpunk and for CD Projekt Red. And Adkins had strategically transferred the expansion in, hoping it would get a separate page on OpenCritic. It did, much to the dismay of the Salmons of Society, who says it's bollocks that you should have expansions and whatnot. But the rule is, gets a new page, you can have it. And it's profited him quite nicely at the moment because it's sitting on an 88. So that's a decent enough score for him, someone who's got an average of 91. He could well run away with this if he just gets his games out. It's looking like if he hits all his marks, the others are going to be... It's going to be tough for them to stop him. He's now sitting on 441 points. So he's 263 off the top, and they've got 4 more games than him.
Can I just add that fucking this is by accident, not design at the moment. I mean, he's picked some good games, but that Baldur's Gate 3, he's so lucked out with that, and it got a fucking outrageous score, which is what has given him this.
Well, he picked it, took a gamble. As Paper would say, you risk it for a biscuit, and he's been rewarded with several bourbons. They are the best biscuit.
Rewarded with bourbons. Yeah, classic. But I don't know what the chances are, but I'd say less than 1% that it got all wiped before. I don't think there's been any precedent of that happening before, where they've wiped it and reset the score.
Just for those listening, they would have just heard a Windows notification go off. It's Xbox trying to tell me about Payday. Don't make noise when I'm recording a podcast. I didn't ask for it to do that. It just went, go and play Payday. And I'm like, well, it's sitting on a 70. I ain't going to waste my time with that. Not that I was interested in Payday anyway, but another bit of Game Pass guff being wheeled out. So yeah, Phantom Liberty's out there. What's your view on the expansions being allowed in the Fantasy Gaming League? Just quickly.
I was going to ask you the same thing. Interesting. I mean, by the letter of the law, that's the rule. And And
should it be the rule though? Should it be new game releases only? The reason why it is the way it is for simplicity.
yeah,
If it gets a new page, you can have it. If not, you don't get it. And it cuts out all the bollocks. Is this an expansion?
yeah,
Is it big? Is it a spin-off? Remasters, remakes. Oh, you can have a remake but not a remaster. But is this a remaster or a remake? Like, cuts all the nonsense out. It's just like, if it's a brand new product that's getting reviewed in 2023 in this year or the year that we're doing the FGL, it goes in. And that's just, and sometimes you get quirks, open critics, not consistent by any stretch of imagination, but it just means from our perspective, everyone knows where they stand. You take a risk with things like this. Sometimes it pays off. Sometimes it doesn't.
I don't feel strongly either way, funnily enough. I'm kind of just like, well, I think if you try and police it, you'll get controversy and people will get upset about it, because it's like, what is truly an expansion and what's not? Like, what are we only ever going to judge an OG game release? Like, would Baldur's Gate 3, for example, be classed as a new release or
it's
not?
in early access for 2 years. You can't have it. This is what I mean.
Yeah, this is where it becomes complicated. So I'm comfortable with the overall rule that if it gets its own page,
you can have it.
You can have it, because anything else just adds a level of complexity that because people are looking for loopholes. Well, and then and it's just like.
Whereas now it's open critics' problem. If they don't do it and it annoys them, I can say, well, don't come to me. I haven't made the decision. You took the gamble and blew it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just policing it would be just too. In theory, it'd be simple. And I think remakes, remasters, all of that. If you said, I think you could, and back in the day, you could say DLC, but I think you could distinguish between what is a DLC expansion package and like a re-release. But something like this, where they've literally redone practically the whole game, like it blurs the lines.
Yeah. And sort of rightfully so. There's now going to be an entry of Cyberpunk 2077 with the Phantom Liberty edition that's scoring probably about where it should be, or should have been originally if it hadn't been such a mess. So from their perspective, they get a little bit of shine from that. There's another redemption arc. We've seen it with No Man's Sky, and I just think back 2-3 years ago how everyone just hated CD Projekt Red for absolutely chuffing Cyberpunk 2077 on the consoles, and particularly last gen. And I think it does show once again, if you work hard at it and just rebuild brick by brick the faith, finally ship a good product, you can get away with it to a certain extent, because a lot of people
are playing it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
No one's gone, well, you had one chance. I think people are willing nowadays, and this goes back to, I think, why it's our approach is generally pays off when we play games. We play games generally when we want to, and obviously we use the open critic score as a temperature check, and I think it's scared the majority of us off of off of this game. But it's definitely now kind of back on the menu, and it's like, fair play to CD Projekt Red for carrying on and doing it. I mean, it's a weird one, isn't it? Because you kind of want to go, don't release shit.
Yeah,
you must have known it, but you did it anyway. So realistically, if they'd have sat there and sort of pushed the pause button whilst they sorted it out and then released the final product, would that have been better? Arguably, yes.
Get it right first time if you can, but if eventually you can ship something good that I can enjoy, then not all's forgiven, but actually all is forgiven, because it's not really affected me. All I've done is not played a buggy game 2 years ago, and now I can experience the best version of that.
Been in early access, some might say.
Well,
if you really this is what I mean. Where do you draw the line? It's like, well, they chucked it out there. All right, they did say it was a full release, but it's effectively similar to what would have been an early access game, in my view. Yeah. Just semantics when you boil it down to it.
Yeah. What's interesting about this Phantom Liberty update is it's not available on last gen. So it's only on PS5 and Series consoles, and obviously PC. So at some point they've looked at that and said, that ain't... The base game shouldn't have ever been released on those old titters. That's the fact of the matter.
Coming to Nintendo Switch soon.
Oh, well, we'll get onto that, fun enough, just after this little break for the intro. Let's do that. Formally introduce the podcast. This is Idle Game Chat, Dimp Digital's flagship video game podcast and show. Actually, the only thing we do regularly. So by default is a flagship, I would say. You got Apps, which is me, the host, or the man running the operations. And we've got the FGL Grand Prix winner, who's maybe on course to be the champion at the end of this year, Logan, resident referee, if nothing else, here to spout bollocks and try and get away with incorrect statements and see if I notice.
I'll do my best.
Always digging to do that. Let's patreon.com/Dimp Digital is the place to go if you want to support it. I should say that just in case there is a millionaire listening. It's like, well, in fact, if you're a millionaire, don't go through Patreon. Just email me or tweet us and give me the money offline, so we don't have to give them 10% or whatever their cut is.
At Dimp Digital.
Not even sure if I'm logged into that account, so probably need to. If said millionaire or billionaire is listening, I'm not going to. Actually,
imagine if you hadn't logged into that and you went back there and someone had actually offered that, but it was like a limited time.
I always worry
deal.
about this lotto not notifying me. It does, but just one time that they don't notify you is when you got the big one. And would it really notify and say news in your ticket and you go in there? It's you've won 10 million.
Yeah, no.
How does it work?
Apparently, I think you get a phone call or something happened.
But I wouldn't answer it because they wouldn't be leaving a voicemail, would they?
I got 2 calls earlier this week, funnily enough. I think when we were doing a recording, I didn't answer that. Could have been anything, but I went, because I'm off work, I ain't doing it.
No, just risky business. So I have to keep an eye. Maybe I should answer the phone more then. But my view is you leave a voicemail and tell me who you are and why you're calling, and I'll get back to you if I want to. And that's
or just don't call. Send a text.
Call. Text me and tell me you won 10 mil, and I'll be like, okay. That sounds like a scam, though, doesn't it? You wouldn't believe it. You can't win. They can only win. There must be an easier
Jim
way.
from the lotto. Can you give me a call back? You've won the lottery. You go, well,
Jim
no,
Ryan,
Jim.
what are you doing here? Anyway, so we was talking about the Switch downporting perhaps Cyberpunk as a bit of a joke. They did do The Witcher 3, to be fair, so who knows? I mean, Cyberpunk's a bit more advanced than that. But I wanted to check in with you on Mortal Kombat 1 because this is in your fantasy gaming team. And what's happened over the last week or so, it's not terrible. It's sitting on 85. So it's gone down a couple of notches, but it's not been completely dumped. But what's contributed to that quite heavily is that IGN have got 2 reviews out. One, I think, is an 8 out of 10 on the console version or the PC version. And then they've put another one for the Switch version, which is a 3 out of 10. And then Nintendo Life have come along and put a 4 out of 10. And, the cliff notes are that this Switch version of Mortal Kombat 1 ain't it. It ain't close to being it. It's just, from all angles, not very good. And not to get snarled up in Mortal Kombat 1 and talk about that specifically, but more generally, why bother with this Switch if you're a third party with a game that clearly doesn't fit the bill? Because all it does... it makes the game look shit because people are like, look at this toilet, runs like shit. And also, from Nintendo's point of view, exposes the hardware limitations. And again, it's a completely different avenue. It's handheld first. We know that. It's got to always cater for that. But you've always got people shitting on that Switch, and this just gives them far more ammunition to have another crap on it, saying it can't even bloody run a fighting game. So why bother? I know it's a profit deal. We know that.
Yeah.
But optically, sometimes someone's got to look at that and say, this don't look good for anyone involved. We're all staring at each other in the boardroom going, well, that ain't gone well, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I really wish they wouldn't do it. And it doesn't just go for the Switch, to be fair.
What if you're only on the Switch and you're like, I want to play Mortal Kombat? My argument to that is, you don't want to play this version of it, trust me.
Yeah. This is the thing, you don't even get the version that's worth playing. The simple fact is if you want to play certain games, you need a platform that can run them. Yeah. And that may sound cruel, but if you can't afford it, you can't have it. That is my rule in life. I can't have a Bugatti. I can't afford it. So
on finance these days, I've seen all sorts roaring around these parts.
This is the point. It's like we're trying to move something over. And I broadly speaking, I'm okay with them releasing a toned down, diluted version of games that people can play on another console. I'm fine with that as long as it runs. And but there must be a base level decision where you go, can this set of hardware?
What's the minimum standard of quality we need? Can this do it? If the answer is no, you go, sorry, I know it's 100-odd million install base, but let's walk away from that. I can't imagine.
If you can't run a mobile, then you can't have it on Switch.
Sure.
Because the Switch is.
Super
I
Switch
would
incoming.
argue that this Mobileye has probably got more grunt in some respects than that Switch. I would argue it. I'd like someone to prove me wrong. But when you look at the size of that Switch, it's, most of it's Joy-Con and screen. So in terms of hardware, I'm not, it's probably got a better GPU in it or something like that. But
I think it's unquestionably better than these Mobilize.
Well,
and we'll get onto it. Funny enough, I'll move it up the rankings, but there's another topic that will come up that will. You can look at the specs. I think that'll tell the story. But the fact that we don't get Mortal Kombat even tried on a mobile device suggests because if you could, then they would. This is the thing. This is why the Switches get
mobile going on.
Yeah, but what's that level down to? That's not up to snuff, is it?
That is all right. It's.
Yeah, but it's not the real McCoy. That's what I'm saying. It's a bespoke mobile shitter.
Yeah, which it should be. But this is my point. It's kind of like if you're going to do something, then you either ratchet it down to a level that they've obviously, when we talk about what happens with the Xbox, with the Series X and supporting that S, and you go, well, they've been
75% they reckon from these leaks of Xbox Series S split.
What?
75% of Xbox Series consoles out there, this is a year ago or so, this data, is Xbox Series S.
That ain't.
Well, that's what the leaks have. They've wrote it in their internal documents. People ain't buying that X.
I don't understand people buying that S.
Because if you're just looking at it from what's cheaper, you just go, well, get that. Or if you get
50% of those have now upgraded to an X.
No, they haven't, because they haven't had any games to play until recently. Maybe they had this last week with Starfield, perhaps. But honestly.
Mad.
You also got to remember, there's probably a lot of people that are PlayStation or Nintendo first, and they're like, right, Xbox is only ever going to be a secondary console. Why bother with the... Because we've sat here, how many times have we sat here saying we've got this PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X, the Switch, and now PC sitting here. They're all at various stages collecting dust. It's not a good investment. It's not. No one's recommending to do that. Like the normal behaviour would be to get one, and if you wanted to get another, if there's a cheaper option, you go for that. Yeah,
it's fair to say that the approach that you and I and various others in this group have taken isn't
pathetic.
The most economic.
It ain't. It's not. It's not a good idea.
I would honestly dread to think the amount that I've splurged on this gen. But anyway, look, I do get it, but at the same time, I don't. I find it bizarre, but they've got to basically what we've discussed many times with that S is that they want to have feature parity.
Well, they've given up on that. Baldur's Gate 3 gets the green light to not have split screen on S, but can have it on X. So Phil's already bent the knee there and gone, that's not worked out, is it?
Right. So the water's broken already.
Oh, exactly.
Is that what they say?
Yeah. To be fair, I mean that particular feature, split screen co-op, the use case must be like 2% of people that are ever going to use that.
Find me 10 people that are doing Baldur's Gate 3.
I agree, but it's the principle of it, isn't it? When you say one thing, that it's always going to be the same. You won't be left behind, and then, albeit a very low usage mode gets binned, you're like, well, what else is in store for the future? Because we also know, according to the documents that were leaked and whatnot, that there's no plans for them to do a mid-gen upgrade. There'll be a refreshed Xbox Series X, but it won't have any power upgrades. It'll just be a digital version. It'll be a cylinder if these leaks are still what Microsoft are planning. So we're not going to get an Xbox One X style console.
Phil says it's all changed now. Tweeted out. He went, don't pay attention to that. It's all changed. Every single bit of it.
You wrote half those emails. I mean, it probably has all changed, but how significantly can it have changed in a year or two?
Well, Phil says it. Well, yeah, I agree, but
I don't see these fucks as very nimble. They're, these big fucking corporations. They're like big ships trying to turn around. You ain't gonna go. It's probably close to what you're gonna get. And then he's gonna have to. And now, because he stupidly said that, if and when all this stuff comes to fruition, people go, "Why are you talking bollocks?" He talks too much. That's his problem, didn't he?
He has to comment on everything.
There was a stretch this year, and I think it's continued because he couldn't resist tweeting out, where every week I would do the little news cycle watch and see what can we chat about. Every week there was a quote from Phil Spencer about something, and eventually, if you talk that much, you're gonna your web of lies is going to you get caught out. Keep quiet. Like, and it's the whole thing of playing the good guy, isn't it? He plays up, friend of the show, all that. He knows he's friend of the show and plays up to the persona. Whereas, so when something sinister like him suggesting that they should buy a Nintendo sort of pops out of the woodwork in clearly private and confidential emails that no one was supposed to ever see, the mask starts to slip and then people get on his back for that. Jim Ryan, for all of his faults, just plays into being a cunt. So you expect it from him. It's not news, is it? He doesn't get caught out because he's just like, well, I ain't said anything in 6 months. I ain't got to say nothing.
Yeah, he does talk too much. You're absolutely right with that. And he talks himself in and out of trouble, I think. He uses it to his advantage as much as he does his disadvantage.
I think it's a net positive because, as I've said, I think they've galvanised like a fan base that will. I mean, the damage control force throughout this past week because of the leaks, you've never seen anything like it. They're out there putting out fires for Phil. All he's got to do is send one tweet, and that's his PR bit done. The fans and the Greenbloods will go and mop it up for him. They have done a great job PR-wise and optically built this kind of brand loyalty that they will go to war for them.
Yeah,
anyway.
it is a bit like that. But yeah, it's
What's this got to do with a fucking Switch?
Well, tangents. So back to the Switch. Yeah, I think basically what you want them to do is release something playable in whatever form, and it's like clearly on those sort of scores it's not. But I wanted to touch on is it right to review a game differently on different platforms?
I would say if it's fundamentally a different experience, then absolutely. And this sounds like that case. Yeah, it looks like it's the case. Like if something.
Or
go on.
So my argument is, so say it run like a bag of shit on the PlayStation, and it runs well on the Xbox.
Wow.
Do you get a PS5 score and an Xbox One? Or is it just, why is this Switch getting special treatment? Because it's such a fundamentally different version. I just disagree with it. I think if it's Mortal Kombat 1, and you're releasing Mortal Kombat 1 on these platforms, like Cyberpunk didn't get a fucking break because it ran like shit on the PS4 and Xbox. Like it didn't. So why are we getting like?
Well, it ain't getting a break, is it? It's getting cracked on.
I know, but this is the point: is that it should form part of an overarching score.
Yeah.
But I don't agree with separate reviews.
So you're saying there shouldn't even be a console review; it should be Switch, and then that's the score that IGN give it, rather than the two they've kind of given.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that they've gone over here, good, over here, shit. It's useful because you know that one version you ain't going to buy. But I feel like it should sully the over. I mean, it does like at the meta level, like sully the score. But imagine if you hadn't seen that Switch specific review and you just went with the one that you saw first, got it on Switch, and all of a sudden you go, "Cool, this is shit. What's going?" Like or the other way around.
I think as a Switch owner, you've got to take some accountability for what you're putting on that platform and understanding the limitations. You can't sit there and expect the world. Like, it's just logic. You have to live in a world of reality where you know what its limitations are. You know the games that Nintendo are going to publish and develop for it are probably going to be of good quality, unless it's Pokemon. And anything else, third party, you're running a risk. You've seen it. You've seen too many examples, time and time again, of them running a risk. But we have seen some great ports, like The Witcher 3, for what it's being put on, is a work of art, a genius type magic. Being wheeled out. But I think the point I would make about third parties, if they want to go on the Switch, you have to do it properly. It can't be side of the desk. And we know we've all been caught out by that crap, haven't we? Just side of the desk activity. And you're like, well, hang on, that's more than half my day every week being fucking blown on that. It can be that. It's almost got to be, we're going to release the game on the consoles and then we're going to work post-release properly on a Switch version to make sure it's optimized.
Similarly, like they do for PC.
And we've seen it with Hogwarts Legacy. That was next gen only, and they delayed the current gen versions and the Switch version. They're going to hopefully work on making sure those versions. I think the last gen versions are out and it runs fine. Jedi Survivor, another example, came to PC, which is still a mess, but did the PS5 and the Xbox Series consoles. They then said we're going to work on a last gen version later on. I think you just have to take that approach. Trying to get everything out over the line at the same time just leads to this sort of disaster because it's not easy.
Too many plates spinning.
Yeah, exactly.
And you drop one, and then it's shit like that gets.
Well, people cry about exclusivity, and it's like, well, think how much easier it is for the developers just to work on one platform or two rather than fucking the Switch and last gen and like. Todd Howard said it. Exclusivity made Starfield better. It's like don't cry about the exclusives. They're annoying to a certain extent, but when Chris and I have explored and spent thousands on the hardware, we sit here laughing. That's what we want.
Yeah, it's ideal for some. I mean, me and you, it just doesn't really affect. I mean, I do prefer it. Like, I do wish they'd leave the old shit in the bin. Like, they have to start drawing a line between new gen and previous gen, I think.
I feel like that's happening more and more. I feel like that's occurring.
Yeah, I mean, there should be a blurred period, but it feels like I think they've kept it going on a bit too long.
Oh, yeah.
But it's difficult to say because how long's the development cycle? How long's that game?
When did the game start and all that?
Yeah. So it is a tricky thing to do, but I think.
And how much did it hold back the design of the game fundamentally? We'll never know. We're just making uneducated guesses that, like, well, that could have been better.
What we're here for. Yeah.
It's like, well, would it have been?
Yeah, but I would like to see that. But I think something like the Switch, which is an old console now as well.
Yeah, 2017.
And it wasn't powerful when it was released. And you think,
it's handheld.
Yeah, I get it. I understand. It's what they said when they released it. It's 100% a handheld console, and that obviously has got limitations to it. And as you say, like when you've got their first-party games that are not perfect across the board, and we've touched and kicked those Pokemon ones many times.
Yeah.
You think, at what chance these third parties have in doing it for that? They must look at that and go, fucking hell, how do we get it to run on this?
Well, Phil's committed to putting Call of Duty on it when that deal closes, so...
Well, I mean, as I say, though, they'll just upscale the mobile version or something to be runnable, I reckon.
He reckons native... get all the open world zombies that's coming, all that stuff.
It pains me. Why don't you just shut up?
Well, to get over the line, and we'll close out the show with what's likely to happen. But it seems like mission accomplished. So you just got to say what you got to say. I think he's under duress when he cut whatever
Everyone
deals.
Can have it.
Everyone can have it. Yeah, exactly. But there we go. Yeah, Switch is a bit of a conundrum. I mean, that's it's heavily speculated that we'll have a new one. Maybe not this time next year, but certainly by Christmas next year. And it'll be interesting to see the power and upscaling technology. I'm somewhat bullish, but I know better than to trust Nintendo on the hardware front.
If it's an upscaled Switch, if it's a Switch 2 where you get it like day one.
So it depends on a couple of factors. One of the big factors is what's going on with this backwards compatibility.
Yeah,
I've got games I've not even played that I've bought that are sitting there. Can I play those? Secondly, what's the docked experience like?
Yeah.
Are we going to be using DLSS? Are we getting the rumours speculating and turning that this thing might be able to, use the magic of DLSS to get a good image quality and higher frame rates and whatnot, which would be a real boon. And really, that's about it. I mean, I'm likely to dive in because I like to get a new bit of hardware now and again.
Yeah.
The Switch, as much as I give it a kick in, it does fill a gap now and again. And if it's offering backwards combat and looking like there's a bit of a power upgrade, and to be honest, are their games going to be exclusive to that new Switch as well? That's obviously a factor. Maybe not initially, but eventually they'll transition over. Like if they come out and say new 3D Mario coming only on the new Switch, I'm like, well, I have to. And that's why the games are important. That's why you should always focus on the games and not the bollocks. But we're going to do just exactly that. So it's sort of this is almost like a sideways transition. It's not a complete change of subjects. It's in the same arena. So the iPhone 15 Pro and the iPhone 15 Pro Max is out. You can go spend $1,000 and change on that if you want. It ain't for me. They never will be, these expensive phones, but there you go. But the reason why it's appeared here is actually during their announcement of the iPhone 15, they revealed that there's going to be Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil Village, Assassin's Creed Mirage, and Death Stranding coming natively to the iPhone 15 Pro and Max versions. Now, Death Stranding is due later this year. Resident Evil 4 Remake's due later this year. And I think Creed Mirage is the first half of 2024. This was somewhat interesting because these aren't cloud-based streaming ones. These are native versions of the game that are going to appear on your Apple phone. I've seen how people configure it, and they basically have a Switch sort of dock that you put the phone in. You've got to control it. It looks exactly the same as what a Switch would. So in terms of ergonomics, they've got that tick in the box. I don't know if there's touch controls enabled, but I think the idea is you play these like you'd play your Switch almost. And I want to just get thoughts on this, because now the phone's out, we'll start probably seeing some real world examples in the coming months. But now that the phone's actually out there for people to buy, this was I found this, I was caught off guard a little bit, because I was just so caught up in the idea of everything's going to go cloud for these sort of on-the-go devices, and that's the only way they can do it. But iPhone or Apple are like, well, look, we can grease some palms, get Capcom involved, get Ubisoft in, get Kojima in, and say, look, you can scale down a version, runs at 720p on the small screen, which is fine, runs well, play Resident Evil 4 on the go. Goodbye.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of comments on this. Firstly, I still maintain the worst way to play any game is mobile. Like,
what if you've got the controller though?
No, so it's still awful. Like, it's you can do it, but it's the worst way to do it. Like,
well, that's Steam Deck.
It's the worst way, and the only one up from that, slightly up from that, is doing it in handheld. Like, I don't get on with handheld consoles. I'm adamant that's the third worst way to play a game, or third best. But bottom of the rung is mobile gaming. But they're specific mobile games that are designed for mobile.
Fine.
Good. Yep. Fine. That is a good way to play those. But I don't like this porting. Like, I don't play Call of Duty Mobile because I find it like it's got to be I've got two consoles, a Switch and a PC now. Why would I play Call of Duty Mobile? Like, I'm not that desperate to play it, and it's the worst way of experiencing it. But anyway, my overarching comments around mobile's got to be more powerful than that Switch are not entirely unrooted in fact, because some of these new chips that are coming out, and I think specifically the Apple chips, are bloody powerful. Like, so.
But you held up your phone, which is I'm sorry, that phone you've got ain't got the guts for it.
What, this Honor? I've got an Honor.
That Honor ain't got the guts for it. I'm telling you.
It's pretty reasonable. It's mid-range,
one step up from Wiley Fox.
This ain't. Motorola's I had before were.
That's true.
I've had a slight upgrade. I did a lot of research into phones a little while ago before I bought this one. And basically the top end, you're getting that. It becomes more of a photography thing, and you can buy top end gaming phones made by Asus and all. Like, you can really go to the nth degree of it, but the power they've got is quite impressive. Like, especially at the top end. Yeah. And Apple and all the Android bloods will be here absolutely wanting to kick them down, going, they've just added USB-C, we've had that for years, charging still shit, this, that and the other.
All's well that ends well, I say. Get rid of that lightning to it, it's gone now. Next. Well done. I mean, that was the EU's doing, wasn't it? They went, you ain't doing that. That was the EU's doing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They went, that's ridiculous. No.
Yeah.
They went, well, it's better tech. You going to license it out? Nah. Well, then you go to the standard, thank you.
It is ridiculous. Like, a lot of the features, I saw something the other day saying, you can now charge your iPods off your phone. And literally, you could do that on a Samsung 3 years ago, not just using USB, but using wireless. Yep. Like, it's mad. Like, honestly, the things that Apple gets plaudits for that was in the Android world 3, 4, 5 years ago is mad. But anyway, so it doesn't surprise me, I think, because those chips in those iPhones are bloody good and they're capable. Yeah. So it's not a surprise, and I think it's a very clever thing to do. The screens are now brilliant. Yeah. Like, so, they're really good and really crisp. So it's like, if you've got these high-end phones, they've got the grunt, they've got the screen. Like,
have they got that battery power to play more than a couple of hours, though?
So this is always the drag, is that you've still got about 15-watt chargings. They take fucking ages to charge up, and the batteries are just probably half of what I've got in mine. Like I think I've got like a 4,000 milliamp battery or something. So they're probably about 2,500 or something in those iPhones. So I think that would be the concern is when you're doing it, but they'll probably start selling some sort of charging pack for it. You know what they're like?
Oh, yeah.
Like basically, they deliberately do this kind of stuff so they can sell an accessory.
Little battery pack on the go, little bank,
Yeah,
like a power bank. I think they. To be honest, I had a power bank for that Switch when I went over to the Caribbean. Got one of those in case it ran out of battery, and it would give it another like 8 hours worth of charge. And,
Yeah, but they're sneaky bastards, right? Because they make their phones only compatible
bespoke
with like
yeah.
bespoke Apple charging packs. So you couldn't just use any old. I mean, I've got a solar one that I use. It's like a big charging pack for when I've been camping and stuff.
Yeah.
But it probably wouldn't work on an iPhone USB because they go, no, it's not an Apple product. So that's where they'll get you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting they're actively kind of like marketing that as a thing now. But again, not wholly unsurprising considering the grunt that they've got.
No, I don't think. I mean, most people that sit here and listen to this low-level gaming podcast aren't going to find much use for this. I would imagine there's probably a few. Not to go out and buy it again anyway if you've already got it. But I suppose the ploy here is not to really serve us because we've got the on-site, experience and the consoles and whatever else. So for us, it's like it'd be maybe convenient if we were travelling or going away.
Yeah.
But then we've got the Switch, so that's what that's for, kind of to fill that gap. But I guess for those that don't have that or are very casual, I suppose the play here is to try and get them in. But I still maintain that those people, these 2 billion gamers I keep getting told that are out there, and it's like, well, 1.5 billion of them are playing mobile games. They're not interested in playing Resident Evil 4.
Yes.
As Leon walking around talking shit. They want to just play mobile games that fit into their schedule.
Pick up and put down.
Yeah, exactly. So this whole opportunity, because you know what the slide would have been internally. Here's the opportunity: 2 billion players that we can reach with these games. It's like, well, yeah, you can reach them, but are they interested? My answer tends to be no. I just don't. I speak to these people and they're like, well, yeah, great, but I don't want to sit there and play that. I want to play something very light touch.
Yeah.
That isn't, I'm playing it on the go. I'm playing it on the commute in and whatnot. These games don't appeal to me. Otherwise, I would have bought a PlayStation or an Xbox or a Switch already.
I don't see many people. I really think this whole premise that people play games commuting, I haven't seen it, or very rarely. I've had one person that sat next to me a couple of months ago on the train into work, and he was playing a Switch, and I was like, bloody hell.
Have you seen more people playing just like Candy Crush, or I saw someone playing dominoes the other day?
There's people that play just mindless. I mean, I sit on the. I don't do it. Like, I'm like, this is downtime. Like, I'm going to watch a series. Like, this isn't when I want to be getting stressed out by that fucking Resident Evil chasing me. Like, I haven't seen it. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not there. It might not be in my market. It might be in Japan or another country. Like, this is what I mean. There might be more of a culture of that.
That's very true, actually. Could be the Chinese market or
this is what
Asia
I mean.
And whatnot. Yeah. That's definitely more. You're right. That was a good.
And you think about it's the scale as well, right? If you think about the US, like people will travel 8 hours in a car to go and see their parents for the weekend or something. Like
they only go up the road as well.
This is right. So this is the thing. Whereas I'm like, do I want to go and see my mum today? It might take me 45 minutes. That's too long. I ain't doing that.
A127's fucked. Not dealing with it.
These roads are too busy. So, and if it's anywhere near 9 and 5, then you can't move. So, but this is the difference. It's kind of like we do very short journeys comparatively to a lot of other countries because we're so small. But we don't really realise that. We think everyone's doing what we are. Whereas, imagine if you're 17 in your parents' car.
Yeah.
What are you going to do for those 8 hours going to see your grandparents for the weekend in Connecticut or whatever? Like, so
I used to play that bloody Nintendo Game Boy. I used to go camping. It used to make me sick though. I used to get travel sick looking down at something Well, I used to get travel sick anyway, and what made it worse was looking down at something. If I read something or played something, I soon realised within 20 minutes I was like, I'm going to chuck my guts up here, and often did.
Sickener.
Yeah, it was a sickener. It was a sick note.
So yeah, I think there is a bigger market for it in other countries with bigger scale where people have got more time to burn on travelling and stuff. But overall, I don't think there's, as you say, it's kind of like put FIFA on there, or I don't know, like something more quote unquote casual, like those.
Yeah.
I just don't see people playing those.
Yeah,
but it's a good way in.
Death Stranding, it's like it's a niche in a niche. That's a niche of a niche. Like, that's for the real nerds like me. It's like
like road building simulator, isn't it?
That's what I made it into.
Yeah, strange one, but I've always been interested to see where this goes in terms of blurring the lines between I do wonder whether there is this continued market for handhelds. I mean, there is at the moment, but I feel like it's blurring with how powerful phones are getting. I kind of feel like...
Well, this blurs it even further now, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
It's no longer are they restricted to the cloud version. They've got native AAA, for lack of a better term, games that are coming. Yeah. Like Resident Evil 4, that came out this year. Like, it's not like these are particularly old games. Assassin's Creed Mirage is not even out yet. And yes, it'll be coming later on down the line. But, well, look, again, we talk about bloody that Switch, chucking versions out that day and date. Look what they've done here. Let's work on it. Get it right.
I was going to say, it'd be interesting to see how they actually play and what the feedback is. Like, because I'm thinking about just a down-resed version of the actual game. Like, but is that all it's going to be? Like, I think it'd be interesting to see what the
compromises are, because there will be compromises.
Yeah. There has to be. There's no way that something the size of this PS5, this PC, this Xbox can be played on something this big. It's not possible. Otherwise, they wouldn't be that big, would they? Like, they'd be smaller.
No, you'd hope not.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm with you on that. It'd be interesting to see what sort of game it is. But I'm pleased, although it's not my preference of how to do it. Like, I'm pleased that there's inroads being made into moving some of these games onto a more mobile form.
It's cool, isn't it, from a tech point of view?
It is.
These mobiles. I mean, keep in mind this is the Pro and the Pro Max version of the iPhone, so top end required. But the fact that that's even becoming an option, and yes, it's 4 games at the moment, but let's see how they do, and might be something that we report back onto track and see. Who knows? Might have some nuts. I don't know if there's any Apple heads in our Dimp crew. I don't think there is. And if they are, I don't think they're the ones...
I won't call him an Apple head, but he's an iPhone
He is,
head.
But he's too busy spending money on cars, isn't he, than getting the latest and greatest phone. Who knows? It surprises me sometimes when you talk to people and they're like, I've got the new iPhone. I'm like, really? You don't even look at your phone, but... They just have to have it. So there might be one of those lurking. I'll have a little...
They get locked into them contracts still, somehow paying £60 a month and doing all that. And I'm like, we stopped doing this surely like 8 to 10 years ago. Why are people still doing it?
Got to get a new phone. That's one way to get it, I guess, rather than paying the £1,000 or whatever it is.
It's a lot. It is a lot to do. Pee-wee's an iPhoner.
Is he?
Yeah, but he always gets the one that's sort of 2 or 3 years old. He's like not fussed about that breaking edge tech, and he'll only do it if he absolutely has to.
Fair enough. We'll have a look at this and see. Maybe there'll be some metrics. I'm sure there'll be impressions once the games drop and how they're running, how they're looking, and will we get a new Open Critic page for some of these reviews? Or are they just going to be reviewed into the main page? Another controversy perhaps swirling as we move out of that. So we mentioned the Xbox leaks. People were wondering why the whole episode is not dedicated to that, and I just think, well, it's interesting, but how much can you glean from it? It's old stuff. There's some eye-opening emails and eye-opening strategies, and there's certainly some good stuff in there. But you have to go really deep to get it right, and I ain't interested in doing that because it would have taken the whole fucking load of hours for me to do, and the whole episode would have been it, and I'd have got bored after 10 minutes. But there was one particular item that came out, which I'm not going to focus on Xbox for this. It's more of the idea of it. And again, we're coming back to hardware. It's in their roadmap the plan as of a few years ago was that Xbox are looking to release a new console in 2028 that is a hybrid of on-premise and cloud. So here's kind of a part of the vision that they put out there. Develop a new generation hybrid game platform capable of leveraging the combined power of the client and the cloud to deliver deeper immersion and an entirely new classes of game experience. So this, for the layman's like myself, is game will play, you will connect to the cloud whilst playing said game, and those cloud interactions will enhance the game in some way. Obviously, that's about as close as we've got. We have seen this before, Crackdown 3 being an attempt at it. And in fact, I don't even know if it even came out and got released. I cannot even remember if that even happened. But more recently and more successfully, Flight Simulator leverages this. So if you enable the cloud connectivity, the detail of the cities or the terrain you're flying around is hugely boosted. And if you play it offline, you don't get that. So parking Xbox, the brand aside, because people will start getting angry. But what about the idea of the next generation of consoles, or in the future a cycle or an option where you could have your Xbox Series X or your PS6 or whatever it is, and some of the games could be enhanced by connecting to the cloud and allowing that to happen. And then one step further, which is the out-of-the-box one, a cheaper device that has limited on-premise power but uses the cloud to make up for the difference. So let's say 200 quid, 100 quid, something like that. Those two ideas floating around, what do you make of it? And look, we're not technology specialists, we never will be, but I think we understand in principle what they would attempt to do. It's whether, from a end user perspective, we think it would be beneficial to either us or others. You're in cuckoo land, Phil, he wants to say.
Well, no, because I've said to you many times before in this podcast that I thought it was going that way. Like, you'd plug into the wall and you'd play. You wouldn't have, like, your monitor would plug into the wall essentially, and you'd do that. Everything would be cloud-based. But nothing has really gone that way, and I don't know whether that's because of technical limitations, risk, or just people's innate desire to have hardware of their own, and especially on like PC, to be able to customize that and build it to what they want. Like, I think people always retain an element of that.
Yeah, it's a hobby itself, isn't it?
Yeah,
to build it yourself and do it. That's not going to go anywhere.
Not everyone has got the same requirements in terms of power and all that kind of stuff. So I think broadly, hardware of some sort is here to stay. And I think, let's be honest, hardware also generates profit. But I think there's a profit margin, although they'd say it's not high. There is a profit margin on the hardware that's produced. So I always see that staying. Do I want anything? Because arguably we're using the cloud all the time. We just don't really cloud saves here. Like, everything's pretty much uploaded to the cloud. You're interacting. You referenced on some of the reviews.
That bloody F1 game always pinging the get off.
Yeah. So
that's a little bit of foreshadowing for a future impressions coming soon.
Interesting. I don't know what, it's probably not coming today, but so yeah, I think I'm okay with it. It's just I don't know if I'd want to make the choice. I think if I had the choice between relying on a cloud or relying on the hardware in my own house, I'd still choose the hardware. But yeah. I think if you're thinking about something like this Series S, where you add two consoles, one with the hardware, one part hardware, part cloud, and it's, as you say, cheaper, I think there would be a market for it. Would I buy it? Probably not. I'd go for all the hardware just to be on the safe side. But I think there'd be a market of people that wouldn't be as bothered.
What if, and this is all speculation in terms of what it might look like, what if the promise was that you can buy whatever console, the high-end console, the on-premise experience that doesn't leverage the cloud, but you know it's all there and it's working. You don't have to worry about the internet too much, although 80% of games require it anyway these days, so you ain't going to be playing them regardless. Or a slightly cheaper model which didn't have the guts of it, weren't as powerful, but it would automatically and only really operate in a cloud harnessed environment. And the upside of that exceeds what you could do with your, the other version of the console, i.e., by enhancing it with the cloud, the game will actually look and run better on the cheaper device.
Interesting.
Do you know what I'm saying?
So what you're saying is you wouldn't have the hardware, and it would run worse
if you don't connect it.
If you don't connect it.
But if you connect it, it'll run better than your top level on-premise console.
So I don't expect that to ever happen in the real world, but it's an interesting quandary. I mean, look, I'd always take the option of the game running or looking better.
Conservative.
I think most would, right? I'm always online, right? So this world in which I'm off the grid doesn't exist. Everything I've got, laptop, phone, all my devices are already using the bandwidth.
That brain chip that Elon's given you.
That'll be online soon.
They're asking for volunteers for that.
I ain't doing that. Can you imagine? Report back on that. The Real Tech podcast. But yeah, I'm not against it. Like, and I actively prefer using cloud saves and things like that anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I was able to pick up my Xbox. I obviously bought the PC. I thought, I'll try out this cloud save, like see how it all transfers over seamlessly. Yep. I can play Football Manager 2023 console edition on my console. Turn that off. Turn my PC on, load it up on here, and download the same save and play and continue. Like, that's mad, really, when you think of it like that. Being able to just use it like that is like blowing my mind. But I'm already using it. I'm already seeing the benefits of it. So I'm not against somehow using the cloud to enhance the overall gaming experience. But it has to be, what's the word? It has to just be natural. It can't it can't be laggy. It can't reduce my gaming experience.
Can't introduce like a noticeable level of latency or something. The experience has to only be enhanced.
Seamless is the word. And I know that's an obvious word to use, but it really does. Like, I don't want to spend all this money and have all this here and being relied on some shit cloud that hasn't got the grunt. Like, this is my frustration all the time. Is I've got 500 meg connection here, download. Very rarely can I get that because of the server limitation or whatever it is.
Nothing downloads that quick.
Nothing downloads that quick. So it frustrates me just on that front that I've got something that exceeds what's able to be supplied. And you could argue, well, it's future-proof in this, that, and the other, and it is. But that is an example already of where I'm at the limitations of the other end. So I wouldn't want to be limited by what that game server or cloud server or whatever is chucking me. And then if that goes down, can I still play the game? Like, there's a million and one questions. I think it's probably more applicable to a single-player game than like an online multiplayer or something like that. And that's another thing. I don't want my bandwidth being fucking clogged up by uploads and downloads from a cloud. So there's some questions there, but in principle, I'm open to it.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat. I think obviously was just a lot of. It's all idea and speculation. This is coming off of a slide, that was made a few years ago. There's no real detail as to how it would work, and they're using stupid terms in there that just to get people excited internally. But the idea of it in my head, in my very simple layman's head, thinks that yes, it can work. And I've seen it in real time with something like Flight Sim. It's impressive, but it's not like the game changer. And I think that's where they've got to be. Whoever decides to push this forward, if it's Microsoft, if it's Sony, if it's Nintendo even, to make up for the power of that Switch suffering, they have to, at some point, not over-promise on what it can do. Yeah. Because it can unravel quickly. And
I think it's ideal for papering cracks.
Yeah.
Like, if there's... I mean, we've talked, obviously, earlier in the podcast around the lack of grunt, for example, on like a Switch or the S. Like, if that can help alleviate that gap in hardware, then fine. Like, that's a good thing. Like, it gives the developer... I say it gives the developers something less to worry about, but I'd argue it gives them
I
more
don't know
to
how.
worry about.
That's another
way.
good point. If and how is there another layer of complexity they've got to consider at that point?
Yeah. So I think if a game was going to use it, they use it for all the versions. Like even the most powerful version, they're not going to go, we'll just use the hardware. Like they'd build it.
So do you just ship a base version and say, depending on your hardware, it will scale to a minimum standard, but then the cloud will get it up to the same standard as whatever, and it'll be more.
That's what I think.
It'll use more cloud computing if you're on a Series S version compared to an X version, but you'll be close to parity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I think they'd do, is that they'll use AI or something to.
Oh, yeah, that was mentioned in the slide about.
Yeah, I mean, everyone chucks this shit out. It really annoys me. It's like every meeting I'm in at the minute, it's like, what are you doing around AI? It's like, use it for what it's used for. Everyone doesn't have to use it somehow. But anyway.
Skynet.
Yeah, Skynet. So I think they'll use AI in some way to sort of flatten everything out to give everyone the most consistent experience. That's how I'd expect it to be deployed. But it's a tool. I mean, you saw that Google did it solely from the cloud. And I mean, that didn't work, but the idea in principle, as I understand it, did. So, I think there's something there to be used, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the AI thing's interesting because DLSS is kind of using the leveraging AI for their upscaling tech. So I would imagine that will be a big makeup of this solution, whoever decides to use it. And obviously Microsoft are in an intriguingly strong position because they own Azure. So they've got direct access to it. Yeah. And if Sony or Nintendo decide they want to get in on it, they'll be like, well, you can go use Amazon Web Services, or you can go and use Google Cloud, or if you come to us, but you'll be paying us. I mean, actually, years ago there was an agreement made between the two firms and Azure, which must have been. I think at that level it's not really. It's Sony and Microsoft rather than Xbox and PlayStation and Switch, if you know what I mean. It feels like it's a much more corporate, higher level discussion than. Like Phil probably won't even be in the room there because it's nothing to do with.
I think I'd be surprised at how incestuous businesses can be in this way, like, and how it's kind of just like your competitors. But it happens in every realm where.
Yeah.
Like people don't cut their nose off in business despite their faith. Even if they're a competitor, it's like if you're going to give us some money and use our product and this, that, and the other, they'll go, we'll take it. Yeah. Like it's just the way it goes.
Yeah, it's when everyone was saying, because of the FTC and the Microsoft Activision deal, Sony have really dug their heels in. That that's it. They'll never talk. They're never going to work with them. And then we're still getting games going on PS Plus that are coming out of the Microsoft system. So absolutely not. You're completely right there. That I know the fanboys want it to be this big war, but internally they're all like, right, what's that bottom line looking like? Can we enhance it for us? Yep, let's go and do it. Let's get skin of our nose.
The world of capitalism.
Keep Alan happy and we're happy. And Alan wants the cash. Speaking of that, the CMA has identified limited residual concerns with the new deal of Microsoft. While the CMA has identified limited residual concerns with the new deal, Microsoft has put forward remedies which the CMA has provisionally concluded should address these issues. So, long and short of it is, this looks like it's going to get the rubber stamp. The CMA is got an open consultation. That's the one. Until October 6th. And then after that time, it'll make its final decision, but this sounds like the last barrier is removed, and it's down to them addressing. They've basically licensed out their cloud for Activision Blizzard to Ubisoft, and that's got around the concerns that the CMA had. So they did have to restructure the deal quite significantly in that part. And all the people saying they'll just close over the top of the CMA, big bad fit. And they've crapped themselves and come up with this solution, which has kept all parties happy. And then probably in 3 to 4 weeks' time, this might all be over officially. So
we're just going to overrule.
Yeah.
The Competition Markets Authority in the UK and go, oh, shut up. We're doing it anyway. It's never going to happen. So, but they were always going to. They were never going to overrule it, but the deal was always going to happen.
They knew what they
in
needed
some
to do.
respect. Yeah.
The concession. They've made a lot of concessions throughout all this, but definitely needed to do one there. So that saga will end soon. There's no more to discuss there. Let's get out of here. I'm going to do Final Fantasy 16 to close us out. So I finally got through that huge game. Like 70, 80 hours sunk into that one. And I'll be interested to see what other people's thoughts are on that game. So Final Fantasy 16 is coming to close you out. We will see you on the other side.
Welcome to the Dimp digital voicemail service. Please leave a message after the tone.
Hello there, Tom Adcock, Dimp Digital, aka Pac-Man. Don't really like that nickname. Doing my little recording of the video game Callisto Protocol for PS5 and potentially PS4. I don't know if it's on PS4, but I played it on PS5. The game got slagged off by everyone, if I'm being honest. So really put the dampeners on it when I was quite excited beforehand. But I borrowed it off somebody in the Dimp gang, Tom Adkins, thank you very much. And I played through it. And I was pleasantly surprised by this game. I think I beat it in about 9 hours, 8 or 9 hours. Very linear, which is just what I needed at the moment, because time isn't forthcoming, spare time that is. So not getting lost and just being able to like blast my way through, very helpful for me at the moment. So I enjoyed that. I was very grateful for it. I don't know why this game got slagged off so much. So, it's quite atmospheric. The thing I wouldn't say, it's not very scary, and it's probably trying to be scary because, like, all the enemies can approach you, and you can just hold left or right to dodge them. I don't know. It takes the fear factor out a bit, somewhat for me, and also there's so many jump scares that they just very quickly don't become jump scares. So it's by no means perfect. And also the main character, bloody hell, so dull. Looks like Johnny Drama from Entourage, but ain't got nothing to say. And a pretty standard storyline. I guess, our marks down. But I enjoyed my 9 or 10 hour playthrough on this game. This is very rambling. It's just like sort of stream of consciousness review, because also weren't many bosses, and when they finally introduced them, they repeated them several times, which was a bit weird, I found. So I guess it is a little bit of a couple of odd bits about this game, but overall enjoyable. Melee combat focus is good, although it can get frustrating when there's multiple enemies, because you can sometimes try and move out their way, and because you hold left or right to dodge, and you're trying to walk left or right, but you're actually just dodging or like stuck in a bit of a loop with multiple enemies. Can get quite frustrating. But then you get gunplay and it becomes more like just a standard third-person shooter-esque type deal. But yeah, overall, Callisto Protocol was a very decent playthrough. I'm going to give it a solid silver. There you go.
Here we are then, back with some game impressions to close out this edition of Idle Game Chat. We've got apps here, and Logan has joined me to talk about Final Fantasy 16, which Logan didn't play. So I saw their eyes light up there. I was like, no, we haven't got him that far down the rabbit hole yet to play these sorts of games. This is one I played, but he's here to run the show, run the operations, make sure the conversation's good. It's not my fault if it's crap.
Well, it depends. I'd argue if you get Biff on to do a review and he goes, "Is it good?" and he goes, "No." What's wrong with it? And he goes, "Well, I didn't like it." You go, "Right. Well, this is going to be
that's Biff, yeah,
out of a stone." So the onus can be on the interviewee. Is that right? Not the interviewer. Yeah. But I don't think there's any such issues. Normally, the problem is actually trying to stem the bleed of the waffle. I think that's the issue that generally both you and I have. So yeah, Final Fantasy is an interesting one, and you gave me a choice of a couple of games to pick, and I chose this one. And sometimes I like to choose games to talk to you about when we're doing a review, because it's even more interesting for me when I just don't really know what any of them are about.
No.
And I have to be honest, I'm aware of what Final Fantasy is, but that I've got no real idea about what it's good and bad at, and what people love it for. Because it always tends to review really well critically, and you don't ever hear about it getting crapped on really.
No.
But as you alluded to into the intro, it's not my bag, and I haven't got that far down the rabbit hole. So I guess first element, as we always do, is cards on the table.
Well, Final Fantasy is an interesting one. We mentioned there what are they good at? You know, what's this kind of hook of them? I do think more than any other franchise, they tend to. Right, I'm not that experienced with the franchise. Let's get that out of the way first, actually. Before I start making statements about what Final Fantasy is, caveat that with I've actually only played 3 of them through to completion. That's Final Fantasy 15, that's Final Fantasy 7 Remake, and that's now Final Fantasy 16. Back in the day, I feel like I played like Final Fantasy 6 or 4. One of those. It's just. It's too hard. I didn't understand what was going on. It was too much. Like, I wasn't back then. You're playing Mario Kart, and that's it. That's all I was interested in. So that was that. So that's really my sort of modern day kind of experience with it. Which the reason why that's important is because actually that's during the action kind of era of Final Fantasy. These started off as turn-based JRPGs, and then more recently have gone into action-based combat. So you're not. It was turn-based, and they had active. I can't remember what they called it now. Active time, something or other, and basically it meant it was command-based essentially. So there wasn't any pressing of buttons to punch or kick or slash. You chose the command. The enemies could attack you every so often. It was a continuous battle, but you'd use it from a command list. That's what they morphed into. So I don't have any real experience with those type of games, but what I was going to say before I thought it was best to clarify that knowledge is probably lacking here is that from the outside, these games have probably changed in terms of franchise, moving on and changing. They've gone through a lot of different iterations and different types of gameplay just on the action front, and they've tried all manner of different things. So I'm not sure definitely what Final Fantasy 16 is now is not what Final Fantasy 1 was, and certainly not what Final Fantasy 7 original was. Like, it's completely changed, and this one more than others, I'm told, is an even more of a departure from perhaps the traditions of it. But for some people it's come up trumps, for other people it's got up their nose because it's not Final Fantasy, which is a difficult one to kind of deal with. I think that was something that I was going to peel into, was the fact that I bet there's been... I mean, to be fair, I haven't seen an absolute outrage over the years about this move away, but I expect there'd be the hardcore mob that are going, but we want it... And was that change something that got you into it? I think so, because I don't know when they started doing action-based combat. It may well have been 15. 14's an MMO, so you can get that out of the picture straight away. And I'm not too sure about 13, the ones before that, but that certainly made it, at least looking through the window, going, that's a bit more palatable to me. Now, having gone through the 2 Persona games, which are old school turn-based, no like active time going on, now I wouldn't even bat an eyelid. In fact, I'm actually semi-interested in playing the really old ones. They've done a pixel remaster of Final Fantasy 1 through 6, which aren't overly long games. I think they get longer as they go on, but the first few, whilst will probably be quite archaic, are there. So I think initially it was kind of almost a requirement for me to sniff at it, but now that requirement of has to be action, real-time combat has just disappeared from me. So in a 2023 world, that wouldn't concern me, but it certainly did when I was looking at these games back in the day. They weren't getting on the menu.
Interesting, because I'm not a particularly big fan either of turn-based combat outside of Pokemon. I don't know, I just find it a bit bland in terms of like thinking on the fly, but I'm sure there's a million and one comebacks for that. It's just not my favourite mode of dealing with it. So I think we've kind of touched on your background there and heavy caveats around the franchise. Yeah, there he goes.
There's
Listeners of the
Valentino.
podcast will be familiar to Valentino coming down your road. So, in terms of Final Fantasy, then, what is it that has? What did you like about this one? And is there kind of themes that run through the game that you have enjoyed and why you've played the last few? Or are they just games that in isolation you've enjoyed playing, so you kind of keep coming back to it? There's kind of 1,000,001 questions in one there, so
Yeah.
pick the bones out of that as you want to.
Well, I think
Won't be taking Piers Morgan's job anytime soon, will I?
no. Well, keep him away, I say. It's so the first thing to kind of say is that there's no link between there's no it's Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 16. You go, cool, 16 of those. How do you tie that story together? The simple answer is they never have, really. They are separate entries that I am not experienced enough, but at best allude to other games, perhaps in the past tense of like, thousands of years ago we found this technology. And it might be like almost considered an Easter egg of sorts that they'll find.
Right.
They share like the currency system's called Gil, for example. They always share that. That's always the same. There's certain spells that usually return. But in terms of a narrative, in terms of the world that they're set in, they're usually fundamentally very different. And that's going to change with Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, because that will be a follow-on from Remake Part 1. So that's actually going to be a 3-part kind of saga they're doing, which was originally just one game. So there's no narrative thread for me to pull out. I mean, originally that's why 15 was like, okay, I don't really need to concern myself with the story. What I found out after finishing it was that there was a fucking CGI movie that you ought to have watched, which I did afterwards, and I was like, that makes a bit more sense now. But I hadn't done that. I think
Annoying when they chuck out stuff like that.
Well, I had Sean Bean in it.
It's like allegedly that you should watch all the Clone Wars series of Star Wars. It's like, no, I shouldn't. It should be
have to now.
bonus footage. But they go, oh no, you'd understand X, Y, and Z if you watched that. No, stick it up your ass anyway.
It does get too much. But for 16, in terms of what I actually liked, I didn't really know what to expect because I'd heard that and seen that it's not really Final Fantasy. And I think there's a couple of things that the traditional. Half of the traditionals are gone because they don't want the action combat. So they were out with 15, or perhaps earlier. They didn't like it. But this one still has the action combat. It's very good. But also it lacks, I think, what people enjoy about had enjoyed about these games, in that there's not really too many RPG elements to it. Like, you can unlock abilities and whatnot, but you can reset your ability points with no consequence. So you can just experiment with different powers and abilities and find what works for you. You unlock there's no choice really to be made in terms of building your character. You just kind of get the next higher up bit of armor, you get the next sword that's higher up. There's no like trade-off. It's like, do you want to build towards a more defensive type character, or do you want to build towards attack and being on the front foot? It's kind of like, do what you want, but your gear isn't going to define your character. There's no real class system for you to get involved with at all. It's very much a skill-based game rather than a leveling-based or a gear-based game. And every game these days seems to have some element of gear chasing, doesn't it? You know, it's always get the numbers up, and you know that's how you need to play the game.
Yeah, I mean, Destiny, The Division. There's so many that you play, and it's sort of, as you say, you're just chasing bigger numbers.
And you can find like unique stuff in the world if you go and off the beaten path, or you do the side stuff. You will get there are slightly better weapons to be had, but it's not it's not make or break. But anyway, I'll say all that to say I don't really care about any of that. That's not a concern for me, because I'm not entrenched in what Final Fantasy should be. I'm just like, I'm playing this game.
Could be or was.
Could be. I don't give a shit. It don't bother me. It's not my concern, because I haven't got the nostalgia or the attachment to the older games or the older eras.
You can only
of the
judge
games.
what's in front of you, right?
Yeah, I can't sit there
There's
and
no
go,
point in you, going,
but
it's not that way, but it's not this way, because arguably you haven't, by the sounds of it, played it in that older format anyway. You don't have the history with the franchise, like where I do, say, Call of Duty. It's like, I can be annoyed about how that's developed, because I've played it and how I know how I prefer it. Whereas if you'd come in on the last 2 or 3 editions, you go, well, I didn't be knowing it when it was like that.
The argument for this, I think this is why Final Fantasy gets more flack for this, is because actually Call of Duty over the 20 years or whatever it is, 20 years plus, has stayed as a first-person shooter.
Yeah.
Like the core of it's always been the same. They've just tried to, spice it up and try different things.
Bullshit on, as I've said a million
they did love a bullshit on, didn't they? Whereas you look at Final Fantasy 1 through 16, it's changed completely. It's not even, it's not the same genre. The combat's completely different. The structure of the way the games work changed from game to game. I mean, Final Fantasy 15 had a big open world area that you go off and explore. This goes back to more smaller zones that you can explore, although there's very little reason to do so, which may be a negative for the game. So I think what they're feeling is that the fans are seeing just fundamental changes and features and things that have been there sort of being removed, and I think what they don't like, and again, this is projection and made up nonsense in my own head, is it's becoming more palatable to a Western audience.
Mainstream.
You can see
Casual.
that. You can see that in the story, the way it's based. Like, this is a very... And look, I bloody love this. The story in this game is fantastic. The characters are fantastic. Like, everything's really, really good. And, you know, the setting... People call it Game of Thrones, the video game almost, and they don't half pinch a few ideas off there that you don't initially kind of think of, and then as you go further in, you're like, oh yeah. But it is a Final Fantasy game, so there's all magic and other stuff that's unique to that series. It's not a complete rip-off. It's just they've borrowed the setting feels much more Game of Thrones than perhaps some of the other ones. I mean, in Final Fantasy 7 Remake and 15, for example, there's people with guns running around, which always rub me the wrong way because you've only got a sword, and I'm like, how? And you're sort of blocking. This has got no guns or anything like that. It's fantasy setting, like standard, like swords, so some shields, magic, spells. That's your lot. There's no fucking machine guns being wheeled out and people jumping off of helicopters and all that sort of nonsense. It's quite consistent with the world there, but yeah, the narrative and the characters and the setting is really, really good in my view, and it's helped by some of the features they kind of have given it to make what is quite a complex world and narrative seem a little bit more palatable.
Yeah, I mean, you'd expect that evolution's probably what's given it its longevity, at least in some form. Like, there's something different, you know, because I find everyone goes, it hasn't changed, and there's 16 of them.
Well, there's that argument as well. You're never going to win. No.
So you'd probably argue that, you know, and let's be honest, like, there's a huge audience in the West for this stuff, and it's in the same way that, you know, you just, with any product, you want it to be appealing to as many people as you can. So, you know, although those in China, in Japan and stuff like that are probably all a bit upset.
And what does he do? How does he do it? China.
Yeah, he goes, it's China.
What's going on with him? Is he locked up now?
Not yet.
Oh.
No. Still got his mugshot going around.
Is he still allowed to run for president?
Yeah, he can be president as well from a jail cell. There is no legislation preventing that. So watch this space. Could be ultimately interesting. But yeah, so although, you know, you might lose some of that sort of hardcore Japanese audience, it's probably, you know, they gain a load of the audience over here. So it swings and roundabouts, right?
Yeah, well, I think people liked the style of the old ones, even from the West. But you know, things I remember years ago when they first showed this, they cited one of the references was The Witcher 3. And you can feel that as well. You can feel that in the setting and the characters, and you know,
that's no bad thing.
No, exactly. But you know, there's always going to be an argument. You can never please 100% of the people. Where this one, probably more than others, has gone off the path that has been forged before it. I think that's what's wound people up. But generally, it's been a well-received game, so they'll look at that and say, "Yep, sales seem to have done pretty good, done okay," and you know, perhaps chalk that up as a success. It's still got a PC release to come at some point, and we don't know about Xbox because we never know what Square and Jim Ryan are up to, cooking deals in the back alley somewhere, greasing palms.
Yeah, true. So I think we've talked about, I want to shift this away from what the fans like,
Yeah, Bingham.
and shift it towards apps, because I think that's what we need to get into. So from your perspective, you like the combat, you like the story, you like the setting. Is there anything else that you would call out that impressed you about the game and that you enjoyed?
Well, I think there's I didn't run into any bugs, like nothing. Not one.
Polish.
It's very polished. Now it's not there's like tiers of this game that are exceptional. Like they look and sound and everything's amazing. And there's also tiers where the game's clearly someone ain't had the TLC in that team. They're not being given that for the side quests, for example. And you're like, okay, well you can see where the money's been spent basically.
Yeah.
But even with that said, generally had no issues on the technical side. Now there is some performance issues which I'll get into when that's appropriate. But generally it's a very stable coded game. Didn't have any quests bugging out, no people just randomly disappearing. Now, some of the weird shit you get with games these days is can be odd, but this, from that perspective, it was completely fine. What helped with the story side of things was, in fact, the active time law, they call it, which basically means at any point during the game you can press the big middle button in, whatever that fucking touchpad, I guess it's called, on the PS5, and it will bring up a little like wheel of document, like little Wikipedia entries that you can basically click on or press the button and go into. So it'll show you where you are. It'll say this is Waloed or whatever, you know. Then it'll show all the characters that are in that scene. So you can say, oh, there's Sir Royland. Sir Royland's not in this, but this, for example,
Sir Royland.
There's Sir Royland. And, you know, you can go on him and it'll tell you the state of his character. So what it does, it kind of ties, every scene has its own kind of unique canvas that you can go into if you're thinking, who the fuck's that? And you can go in there and go, oh, it's Katrina, and this is why you need to remember Katrina's this. Later on, they even introduce a secondary sort of like world map that you can go into, and you can see where all the different, because it's really, it is at a high level, it's quite a lot going on in terms of the political landscape of the game, which helps drive some of the narrative forward. But you can see where everyone's kind of located on the world map and whose forces have been sent where, why there's a little skirmish going on there. You can go into that and you can see all that. So from that perspective, it really helps, because the game does try and cover an awful lot of ground throughout I think my clock is now at 79 hours. So it's a real beefcake. And I did all the side content other than the challenges and the time trials, which I'm not getting involved with. I'm not there to be under pressure, especially when you've got to do 5 stages back to back, and if you fail on one of them, you go back to 1. I was like, well, we're not doing that then, are we? It's just ridiculous. But so that active time law, the only thing I would say is if all the entries were narrated, which I know is a lot to ask, but Mass Effect did it. And I just think, why has no one else bothered to put that level of...
Let me be lazy. You talk to me.
You tell me. There's an awful lot of reading. That's why it's not required. Yeah. You know, it's probably helpful. But as I said, the active time law, the fact that you can just boot this thing up at any time, means you haven't got to go shuffling through menus to find what's relevant to that particular moment in time. You can go in there, it pauses the cutscene, and then you're like, right, there's so-and-so, so-and-so. Oh, there's also a new entry there, have a little red dot. I can go in there and it'll tell you about the location or, you know, a new character that's kind of come onto the scene. Now, one small thing is it did spoil a outcome for one of the characters for me very slightly by about 20 minutes. Now, in all honesty, I knew what was happening because the mission objective kind of gave away, you know, if everything went well, this is what the outcome would be. But the fact that it kind of mentioned it at the bottom of one of these entries means they probably need to just tighten that up a little bit. But, you know, for the sake of one of those out of the hundreds of times I went into that fucking screen, it was pretty good. The trouble is, obviously, Ronnie wants to read everything, so you can imagine how many times he pressed that button, searching for new stuff. Because then it was taking like a 5-minute cutscene would take 10 minutes because I'll be... every time it changed fucking camera cut, I was like, hang on, is there anything new? Nope. Going in and out of there, so that had to be...
It should just give you a little like nod that so-and-so's been updated. It should,
you're right. It should have a little thing saying new entry to be seen.
Yeah.
And that would have settled me, but no, I was in and out of there way too much. And then really what the game's action is really good, but the way in which it ties, it's like a big spectacle. When things kick off, they kick off massively, and it's one of the most impressive games from that perspective I've ever played. You know, you'll be having this massive, great big boss battle. It'll transition into this huge icon battle, which are these massive creatures that you can take control of and fight against each other. And the way it seamlessly transitions between the combat, story elements as this is going on, cutscenes, soundtrack. Like when it's firing on all cylinders, it's one of the best things I've ever experienced. Like audio and visually, it's outstanding. And that's where the fucking money went, not on poor old Bob's fucking side quests that he's asked you to go and pick up seeds for.
Way.
Yeah. And to be honest, as a trade-off, it's pretty fucking good. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It really is just stunning from that perspective, and that's what I feel is kind of one of the things that it hangs its hat on and does really well. You know, you say the combat, the story, all that good stuff. Voice acting's really good, soundtrack's really good, and when that all meshes together into these crescendos of action and scenarios that they give you, it's really special when that comes off. What that does do is it sets the bar so fucking high that when you're not involved in things like that, you're like,
Feels like a little bit of a downgrade.
yeah, it's a tricky balance. I don't think they pace out the side content very well, which then makes that worse, makes that feeling of like lackluster this is even worse, and feels like it's slowing things down. Obviously, you can just avoid the side quests, and you could play this as a point-to-point critical path, and you'll be fine. But if you do aim to play everything, then you're going to be spending plenty of hours away from all the cool stuff and doing stuff that, whilst is actually can be quite interesting, there's probably too much of, and a lot of it's mid.
So I think that probably brings us on quite nicely to some of the things that you didn't like so much. So I think, as you said, side quests a bit meh, and you alluded to performance issues, which I found interesting.
So this is the performance issues. So you've got two modes. You can do performance or fidelity or graphics mode. One runs at 30 FPS. That's fine. Looks great. Runs fine. I played about 30 to 40% of the game like that just to test it. And to be honest, it was fine. Like, it really wasn't that big a deal once after about a minute of playing it. But I did go back to the performance mode. And the reason why I stopped playing the performance mode is because in combat, it's fine. Didn't notice any problems whatsoever. So when it really mattered, it was completely fine. But when you're outside of combat and you're wandering around, running around the sort of zones that you've got to steam around in, it does get choppy.
In performance?
Yeah, like as the frames are dropping and whatnot. And looking into what they've done, they've got a dynamic resolution scaler in there. And basically, when the action kicks off, it dumps the resolution right down so that it's never going to hit the sort of threshold and drop some frames for you. But when you're exploring, it just kind of keeps it at a static, higher resolution that sometimes it can't handle. Now, it's annoying, don't get me wrong, it is annoying. Like, it's definitely a blemish. It's a shame that's not just been cleaned up, because I think if they just aimed for a lower resolution or just scaled it and it says don't go above if you're going to, tip the frame rate down below like 55 or whatever, then it would have been a problem solved. But for some reason they were adamant on keeping it at a higher resolution whilst you're wandering around, and it does create a bit of an inconsistent frame rate. Not all the time, but it's enough to annoy me enough that I went and tried the 30 FPS mode for a few hours. And came back and I was like, yeah, this is annoying, but it's on balance, it's probably still what I would prefer to do. Now, the trouble I mentioned about the dynamic resolution dumping down when the combat kicks off, because there's so many visual effects going on when you're attacking and using your skills and whatnot. You don't really notice anything. You think this looks great. But when you're running through an environment and you run past a mob, because at some point you ain't going to fight everything on your path because you're just trying to get from A to B. You run past a mob, it'll dump the resolution down. And because you're not engaged in combat, the world around you looks a little bit fuzzy.
Right.
And that's when you notice it, when you're sort of running past things and it engages combat mode and you're not actually on top of things fighting. Like, you're just looking at like the trees in the distance. You're like, cool, rough as houses. So that's when I noticed that becoming a bit of an issue.
Interesting.
Didn't affect the gameplay necessarily, but you do notice the trick that they played in terms of keeping the combat as fluid as possible, because they cut down that resolution. It becomes noticeable when you're sort of running past things rather than engaging to them, which you will eventually do, because you'll be in the game 200 hours otherwise.
Interesting. I mean, we've discussed multiple times, me and you, frame rate versus resolution, and the best thing I think we've both settled on is to get the highest consistent frame rate that you can will give the best ultimate gameplay experience. And I think that just backs that up. I don't know. I just don't get this drive for resolution. Like, I get you have to have a minimum, like you don't want it to be 480p, right? Like you want an acceptable resolution, but I think everything from about 720 upwards is.
I think Digital Foundry did the counting on it, and that's what the combat goes into, as low as 720p. And like I said, because it's so matte, you don't really notice it.
Yeah.
But when you're rolling around, I guess that's where it becomes a cost a bit. Yeah, it just seems. I think if and when that PS5 Pro comes out, that will resolve the issue, because it'll have enough grunt to, you won't even have a problem on the 60 FPS side of things. But failing that, at present with just a stock PS5, it will be a bit of a blow for people if you're kind of susceptible to noticing that stuff. It'd be interesting to see how the PC version comes out, because that could resolve all of it for those with the rigs capable. But I don't think their Final Fantasy VII Remake port was the best when that was done. So we'll see. Like, it's definitely a little asterisk there for people to be aware of, that performance not flawless. And I think in this day and age, as we continue through this, that's what we're kind of after and expected. If you want to play on 30 FPS, like some people do, like that's the default mode, as we were discussing earlier, funnily enough, with Miles Morales. But if you want to keep it on that, it's fine. Doesn't skip a beat, looks excellent. But if you want the fluidity, then that's the sort of price you have to pay, unfortunately.
There you go. Is there anything else that's a little blemish that you need to call out?
Well, it definitely suffers from this bloat problem. I mean, it's
Bloatville.
And what that does, the bloatvilles, it does a disservice to the game in several ways. The game disserves itself sometimes, though. Let's be honest. Let's talk about these side quests. So people say the side quests are rubbish in this game. That's not quite accurate. It's an oversimplification of what's going on. Now, there are some absolute crap in there. There really is. Going to pick up dirt and all this sort of stuff. And you're like, well, I'm supposed to be some sort of... Because you're the main character. Look, let's make no bones about it. You're the main character, Clive. You are special in some way, because you're fucking... Clive! You're doing things... I know, that sounds ridiculous, but it works quite well for some reason, the more the game goes on. But you're too important for this stuff. Some of the stuff they're asking you to do, I'm like, can't someone else in this fucking hideout do this? And
can we just can dirt genuinely?
There is one. I'm sure there was one where to go and pick up a certain bit of soil. I mean, that was quite. This is the thing, though. That was they create the worst possible impression for the side quest, because early on, that's where the dross is. Now there is dross. There's dross sprinkled out throughout. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But their first impression of, here's the exciting side content you get your hands on, and it is like there's one where you walk around delivering food in the hideaway. You're like, well, if this is an indication, like most players would, of what I'm going to get for the next 40, 50, 60 hours, why am I going to waste my time with this? So I think they've, hopefully they look at that.
Body work.
It is, but to put that at the front and not offer a tangible kind of interesting arc initially just sets a bad precedent. And I don't blame people for playing those first few and going, Christ, because later on there's good stuff, but it's still got some level of toot surrounding it. So you kind of have to, you go to one good quest and you get a bad one, then you get two good ones and you get one bad one, then you get three good ones, then one. It does sort of iron itself out, but. The initial impression is what kind of, I think, kills it off for people. And, initially, that's what sticks in your mind, the first impression. They do get better. There's some really good stuff in there, especially if you're a lore hound for the world that they've created. There's tons of stuff in there that enriches it. Loads of great character arcs as well. If you go off and do sort of what I would call companion quests, requests for your people that you meet along your way, your friends, if you will. And... you know, barring the first impression, we can get over that. I think what is truly missing is a granular way to categorise some of the better quests, because they're all just chucked in as side quests.
Yeah.
And they're not all created equal. I look at something like Horizon Forbidden West and Horizon Zero Dawn. That had things like errands in it. So collecting the soil would be an errand. And you immediately know that ain't really... I don't need to be worrying about that too much.
Yeah.
But if I want to do it, it's there. Then you had like jobs. Then you had side quests, then main quests. So they granularly kind of... And what this could have done with is a way to show that in your journal that you've got... The more meaty stuff is called X and Y. The hideaway collecting stuff is, is called A and B or whatever. And then as a player, you can make a bit more of an informed decision over what you want to target. Because I think a lot of people will just pick this up, they'll play the first few and go, what's the point? If they're all going to be like that, which you would expect, then I'll walk away from it. So there is good stuff in there, but it's categorised poorly and gives off the worst impression that you could possibly kind of hope for. This is a small thing. You've got a party alongside with you throughout the game. They don't really talk much. I'm used to
that Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah,
Hiking across the lands, and then every now and again there's a little bit of chat. But
I'm thinking about, like, we play God of War. Whoever you're with, there's dialogue, there's interactions, and some people get annoyed by that. I get it. You got Mimir waffling away; he's one of the best. But you'll have like 3 people with you in this one, then everyone's just like, right? It's just, there's no like camaraderie, there's no banter, and you can't choose your party either. That's one thing the traditionalists that'll get up their nose. You cannot choose your party makeup. It's all defined by your main story progress and where you are in the main campaign as to who you can take out with you. You can't go into a menu and you don't level them up, you don't control them. The dog Torgal you can kind of give commands to, but he sort of does things on his own anyway, so you don't need to worry about managing him too much. So there's a bit of a dryness to exploring. Now, the game isn't an exploration game either, I must state that. I think it's an A to Z, a point-to-point action-adventure game. So there's nothing really to explore in the world, nothing to find necessarily, other than the odd box full of, I don't know, goblin ears or whatever that you can sell. And it's like, well... It's not Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom where you go off on this vast world and actually exploring the game is how you find new and interesting things. The game will tell you where you need to go when, and there's no point going elsewhere until you're told to go there, in all honesty, because that's where the interesting stuff kicks off. Final thing that got up my nose was that they have these hunts, okay, like bounties. So these are like big, powerful enemies that will spawn in the world, and they only appear once you've hit a certain milestone in the story or done a certain side quest to clear out an area, usually. And these are like supposed to be tougher challenges, and they are tougher. You've got to just keep an eye on them and just make sure you don't get too careless with it. The only way... So bearing in mind just what I just said, the game tells you exactly where you need to go, when you need to go, who you need to speak to, which is fine. I don't want to walk around a village of 10 people trying to guess who I need to ask about this fucking stranger that walked in. I want to be like... I don't want to go to 9 people and then find the 10th one on the 10th one. I want to be told it's that fella there, he knows the fucking business. Because that's just not... It's a waste of time. So I'm fine with that. With the hunts, they don't tell you where the creature is. Or where the bounty is.
They give you like a region?
They say, region here on the sort of notice board... It's on a notice board in your hideaway, and they have a little description about perhaps where they've seen it. And you're left to find it off based on that, which isn't the end of the world. You think, oh, you've got to use a little bit of sort of local knowledge, look on the map and think, oh, there's a big area there, looks like a bit of an arena, it's probably there. But the annoying thing is you can only access and see those bounty descriptions when you're in the hideaway. So once you go out into the world, you can't get back at them. Unless you travel back to that hideaway and look at them. Why didn't you just rip it off? I said, I'm going to go and do that. I'll take it with me, thanks. That'll go in the journal. So you're free. So guess what I did? Just took pictures of them on my phone.
Yeah.
But why am I doing this? You either let me take it with me so I can refer to it when I want to, or just tell me where the fucking thing is with a map marker like you've done for everything else.
Yeah.
Bit of a Ronnieism,
No,
but that got up my nose a little bit.
No, I think that's fair. As you say, you get somewhere and you go, "Oh, what did that say?" And you go, "Oh, fuck."
Yeah, unless you've got any sort of real world log of it, you can't find them. So
Yeah.
those are what I'd say the critiques are: the bloat, the side quests being uneven, categorization, and then those hunts, those bounties, getting up my nose, and a bit of a performance blemish, and those party members not really offering much in terms of personality. Because when they're in cutscenes and story, they don't stop chatting. They've got a lot to say, but when you wander around that world, they may as well not be there.
You got to pay these voice actors by the word these days. So
Well,
it's strange. Down.
It's strange because when you go into the hideaway and talk to people, they are fully voiced, but there's certain sections where they're not. Where they just bring up the text of what they're saying. They'll say the first two words. I'm like, what? It's never in an important cutscene. It's more like, when you go and talk to someone, it's like, ask them about their past. And you're like, I'll go and see what the blacksmith's got to say for himself, the grumpy old bastard. But it'll say like the first few words of the sentence, and you just read the rest. Then you go to the next page. It's the same. I don't. What's been about where the money's been spent? Again, they've just sort of we ain't got enough budget for that last little bit. So it's jarring because everything else is done so well and so well voiced, but strange. Behaviour.
So is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you wanted to pull out that's noteworthy in your review of the game?
I don't think so. I think like the game plays really well, which is a good point. It really is a fantastic game just to play. I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised Adkins hasn't got it because he likes to chase the 96s and whatnot, and then put 6 things on his plate. That bloody scumbag. But this is an absolute Adkins game. There's no bones about it. I think when he eventually makes time to sit down and play this, he's going to fucking fall in love with it. Because it ticks so many different boxes there and comes together quite nicely. Yes, it's got a bit of bloat. Yes, the performance mode would need a bit more optimization and tweaking. I mean, we are months out from this release, like over 2 months since it released. And I was thinking at some point they're going to drop a performance update. They haven't. They've given us the ability to change our outfits, which is like, well, thanks very much. Not really a concern of mine. And change like the sword. So if you liked, the first sword you ever got, the look of it, you can just put the skin of that on it. Which Ronnie's never going to accept because that don't make sense, does it? But yeah, like they've not addressed the performance part of it, which I think is going to disappoint people. So it may have to be a PS5 Pro or PC version if you want that flawless bit of performance there. But generally, like overall, I think the positives do outweigh the negatives, absolutely. But it does have some minor caveats in there. Some of those are Ronnieisms, but other things are sort of more general things that people need to look out for. Like the pacing of the side quests. I didn't really delve into that too much, but they could have done with spreading them out. They seem to just dump a load of toot on you towards the back third. And you're like, you are aware things are ramping up in this story and the urgency of what we need to do to, get this scenario that's been put in and save the world to a certain extent. And then they're like, well, there's another half dozen bounties and so on. You're like, why? Why is this being saved for like the last third of the game? So contextual, I've got this is a Ronnieism. I've got a real issue these days with how things don't make sense in the world when you do them.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't quite give you enough pause to say, right, take some time to clear down some toot. There's certain points where it's like, so-and-so's under attack, quick! And you're like, well, I could go off and just do the side quests.
Yeah.
But in this world, in this timeline I'm sort of working towards, it doesn't make sense. So it kind of drops the ball there for me. And this is probably foreshadowing perhaps a future conversation, but Spider-Man has that issue as well. It was, I know, and I didn't know. This is the thing. It's the new annoyance that's come to my brain because I did not care about that back in the day. It's something that, as games have kind of done it in good stead, that I've noticed it more. But most people will be like, "What are you talking? Why do you care about that? It's a fucking video game."
Saying that
like,
it doesn't bother me that much, but it's something that I have noticed. I'll be like, "We need to go and save so and so quickly. Let me just do a couple of these crimes on the white light." And it's sort of a bit like, I don't know. But Spider-Man as well.
I'll get that backpack.
Yeah. I know. I'll get that. Quickly go and grab that on the way. I know what you mean. but
Picture! I
besides-
better stop and take a picture of this landmark. While
Did
that...
you? Yeah. I know what you're saying, but Spider-Man also does do the thing where it goes, take some time and do some patrol or whatever.
Yeah.
But you do one, and then MJ calls again, and then it's just like, right,
I'm under attack, and you're like, oh, for God's sake!
I know. Yeah.
Yeah,
But I do agree. It doesn't really bother me, but I do notice it when I'm doing it. I'm like, this is why am I doing this when I should be? Or you've already told me it's better get there quick, and I go, yeah. Let me just sort of clear down this area quick, and then I'll be right there.
Yeah, it's and also there's like, you know, just I know we're going off piste here, but I know we're closing this
It's
up.
not like us.
Spider-Man, like there are certain times in that story where you're not on great terms with people because of squabbling and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then you'll go and do like a base, clear down just as part of my usual, and then you'll ring that same person up and you're like, oh hi, yeah, I'm just at this base, there's these people there. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense, does it? Because you just told me to fuck off.
They'd have seen that and gone,
Yeah, it should lock you out of those fucking quests. I mean, that would be the ultimate sin for most people. They want the video game, not the A to Z
not
story.
real life realism.
No, I know, but
I know what you mean. As I say, I've noticed it, but I just sort of, it makes me chuckle a little bit more than anything. But I think there's something to be said there for, you mentioned chucking a load of stuff at the back end, and you think, that does annoy me because I could have probably done with that a little bit more up front. But I wonder whether they do that for people that have just been breaknecking it and then need to level or like need some activities to, like, I don't know. There must be a reason why it's structured that way. But I prefer things chucked out as early as possible and then give me a menu and I can decide as I go whether that's what's right for me.
Just cut down the urgency. Just let me breathe for a minute. I think God of War Ragnarok was really good at that. It'd be like, when you're ready, come back and talk to us. You're like, all right, I'll go and fuck off and clear down this. And I did. Whereas Final Fantasy 16, as the game gets more urgent, as things sort of ramp up, you get less of those times. And sometimes you just have to say, well, I know if I don't do this and then I end up completing the game, like, is it going to give me the option to continue to do this afterwards contextually? And and there's all. So I try and play it safe and do what I can. But my advice is to do it as soon as it appears, because you'll be left with a lot at the back end. Because where I tried to play it naturally, it was like, oh, better go to that fucking war kicking off or whatever. I left a load of toot, plus they piled crap on top at the end, and then I was like, all right, a good almost 10 hours before sort of concluding the game. And that's what I said about the pacing dropping. Like that kills the pace. Again, it's self-inflicted. Don't need to do all this stuff, because I left all of it and just carried on with the game. But what I would say is, as soon as I went back to sort of the main quest after spending a significant amount of time away from it and perhaps having that lull, I was immediately hooked. So as soon as you got to the mission stage and area and it started to kill, I was like, yeah, I'm back in this. I was worried whether it'd just sort of lose my interest, but no, it did, even after an extended period of time, keep me locked in.
There you go. So I think with everything that we've said, we'll kind of begin to wrap it up. And as we do, go to the Dimp Digital Gaming Gallery, the DDGG, as we call it.
Yep.
Does that work? DDGG? Yeah, we'll take it. And the do we get the keys out and go inside? I expect we do. That should be a formality.
We get them keys out for sure. There we go.
Go into Apps's. Can't remember what we call it. Do we just call it your gallery or your wing?
My personal exhibition.
That's it. Personal exhibition. Apps's personal exhibition, and then we decide where it goes. So, where in your personal exhibition does this go? He's still debating it. He's still not sure.
I think silver.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going to commit to that. It does just have just a few too many irritances. I mean, the performance mode alone, some would say worthy of dropping it, but it's not that bad, but it's not up to snuff. So that kind of excluded it from getting the. It's a shame, because actually there's platinum areas of this game. Like I'll tell you, when like the top stuff that they put into this, the big kind of story missions and whatnot, that is like a platinum standard. But the stuff surrounding it just sort of degrades with a little bit of how they pace things, a little bit how they present things, a little bit of structural problems, and then the performance mode on top. I'm like, you've kind of. There's not enough. As good as those moments are, they're quite not enough to hold it in a platinum for sure. And then for the gold standard, you got to be getting all the basics right first of all to be qualifying in there. Or be super special. And it is, whilst I think it is very good, and certainly I had my feel from this from a narrative and an action perspective. There's just probably a bit too much weighing it down slightly. Who knows? If I do a replay on a PS5 Pro and it's flawless, that may well be enough to knock it into gold territory. But I think as it stands now, they haven't addressed the performance mode, and that's going to weigh on people heavily, and the other things I mentioned just get on top of it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Can't disagree with that. I think, as we've said many times before, performance issues. You're always going to struggle to get in the top echelons if you don't get performance at the very least right. I think it's always going to drag games down, no matter how minor it is. It's a real big bugbear for me. It really winds me up. So I think that's understandable.
That's that. Right. That's Idle Game Chat, another one in the books. We'll be back on the next edition. Who knows with what and with who. But nothing more for us to say other than thanks for your time and ta-da.
This was a Dimp Digital production.